Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Shutarishutashi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Raja Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Samveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Nitai Gaura Pramanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Akyantamirandasya Gnajana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyarevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14, Text 14. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: this material world, when the conditioned soul cannot arrange for his own maintenance, despite exploiting others, he tries to exploit his own father or son, taking away that relative's possessions, although they may be very insignificant. If he cannot acquire things from his father, son, or other relatives, he is prepared to give them all kinds of trouble. Purport: once we actually saw a distressed man stealing ornaments from his daughter just to maintain himself. As the English proverb goes, necessity knows no law. When a conditioned soul needs something, he forgets his relationship with his relatives and exploits his own father or son. We also receive information from Srimad Bhagavatam that in this age of Kali, the time is quickly approaching when a relative will kill another relative for a small farthing. Without Krishna consciousness, people will deteriorate further and further into a hellish condition wherein they will perform abominable acts. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So this verse thus proves the statement that Lord Brahma makes, Shukadeva Goswami makes an explanation to a question of Parikshit Maharaj. Parikshit Maharaj is curious about why the residents of Vrindavan were showing more affection towards their sons, and why the cows were showing more affection to those calves who were directly expansions of Krishna. Krishna performed one pastime of killing Aghasura, and the cowboys, usually when they would come back from the forest after a day of killing demons from Krishna, they would tell their parents all the glories of Krishna. But they didn't tell this particular pastime until a year later. So Parikshit Maharaj asked about that, to which we hear the whole Brahma Vimohan Leela. And at that time, Krishna bewildered the mind of Lord Brahma. He actually expanded himself as the cowherd boys. There are a lot of things that could be details of this past. I'm not going to any technicalities, just in simple form. And when Krishna was himself the cowherd boys and the calves, then the residents of Vrindavan showed more affection towards their children, and the cows showed more affection towards the cows. So Parshad Maharaj was curious about this. Generally, you don't love someone else's kid more than you love your own kid. But here it is seen that they're loving Krishna more than they're loving their own children. So he was curious about this. So today Shukadeva Goswami explains something very interesting, which explains this purport very nicely. Shukadeva Goswami explains, Sarvesham apibhutanam nirpa swatmava vallabha. Shukadeva Goswami says, of all created entities in this world, Sarvesham apibhutanam, it is certainly their own selves that is most dear. Swa atma vallabha. Vallabha means dear. And swa atma, so their own self, is most dear of all created beings in this. And the dearness of things such as apatya, children, vita, wealth, and other things, they are only dear because of its relationship to the self. I've explained this portion many times, but I like it. It's so profound. And it explains this verse very nicely. How when a person is having trouble maintaining himself, he is willing to exploit his own relatives in order to maintain himself. So this proves the statement Shukadeva Goswami makes, that in this world, of all created beings, embodied souls, conditioned souls who have accepted material bodies like us, that it is certainly their own self that is most dear. And the dearness of other things is only due to the dearness of the self. That's a fact. So when one takes the Atma, so Swa Atma, so the Atma can refer to the body, the gross body or the subtle body. Atma can refer to the soul. And Atma can also refer to Krishna. Krishna says in the Bhagavatam, Sukshmana apyaham jiva, of minute things, I am the jiva. Of small particles in this world, I am the jiva. So the Atma can refer either to one's own gross or subtle body, one's soul, or Krishna, actually. So Swa Atma Vallabha, it is the self that is most dear. So when one thinks himself to be the body, Swa Atma, then the dearness of other things is dear only because of its relationship to the body. I often give an example, like my computer. I often give the example of computer. There's nothing intended like that. Generally, I give the example of computer. My computer is very dear to me because it has a relationship to my body. But other people's computers, not dear because it has no relationship to my body. Just like yesterday, Himanshu's and Bhakta Luke's computer was stolen out of the room. And I don't think many of us felt very pained by that. As such, we felt very concerned about our computers. Better go lock them up. Of course, we felt maybe some, oh, Prabhu, I'm sorry to hear, And then immediately ran up to the room, what's going on with my computer? Because my computer has a relationship to my body. Therefore, that computer is more dear to me. And the other computers are less dear because they don't have a relationship to my body. Simple example. So when you think yourself to be the body, then other objects are dear only if they have a relationship to your body. So my children, my computer, my car, those things are dear because of its relationship to my body. And if they don't have a relationship to my body, then they're not as dear. And when you take the Atma to be the mind, then the ideas and feelings of others is not as important as my own ideas and feelings. Those are most cherished, isn't it? Just like when I have an idea, sometimes we have an Ishtagosti and we all may present different ideas. And everyone thinks their idea is the best of all. And why can't others come to the light? Come and see my Jyotirgama. Come out of darkness, go towards the light. My idea is best. And why can't others see it? Because my mind is most dear to me because it has a relationship to me, or my soul. This is a little subtler point. So the Atma can be body or mind. So the things that are dear are only dear if they have a relationship to my body and mind. Otherwise, I don't consider them very important. Now, sometimes it happens that a person, so these persons are sense enjoyers, bhukti, kamis. They're actually sense enjoyers. Then another category is the person who realizes himself to be a soul. The Bhagavatam is an example either because of coming close to death, and therefore you realize that you still want to continue to exist even though the body is about to perish away. So one can begin to understand something about himself being different from the body on account of that experience. That's the example the Bhagavatam gives. Or it can refer to like the Gyanis, who are Swavimukti Kama. They care about their own liberation. They don't care about others. Mohanam charanti vijane na pararti nishta. They're not fixing the welfare of others because they care only about their own liberation. They don't care for others. Let them go to hell or let them not go to hell. They're well-wishers in a very generic sense. They will not wish any bad on anyone, but they care only for their own liberation because they think that their Atma is the soul. So my soul is dear to me, and the dearness of the body and other things is only because it has a relationship to myself, the soul. So therefore it is dear. Otherwise, not dear. And this way, all entities are actually self-centered. This is impossible to give up. They're self-centered. This self-centeredness, it can be a disease or it can be a wonderful thing depending on your realization of the Atma. So then when you have the realization that Atma is the soul, then they are Swavimukti Kama, they are Mukti Kamis. They care about their own liberation. They don't care so much for others in terms of practical activity. They only care about their own because they realize, I am a spirit soul. Then another category understands the Atma to be Krishna because Sukshmana Apiham Jiva. Krishna says, of minute things, I am the Jiva. So some living entities, like the residents of Vrindavan, they understand the self to be Krishna actually. In fact, in one book of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he describes the devotion of the Brajavasis, I think particularly of the gopis, as Sayuja Mukti. Usually Sayuja Mukti is like, oh, we spit at the thought, or at least we're supposed to, as aspiring Vaishnavas. We don't, Sayuja Mukti means merging to Brahman and becoming one. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes the love of the gopis, I think particularly, anyway, the residents of Vrindavan in general, as Sayuja Mukti. Because their desires are so intrinsically related to Krishna's desire. They can't desire anything outside of what pleases Krishna, what satisfies Krishna's desire. That is the definition of prema, after all. So therefore, their liberation is called as Sayuja Mukti. They understand Krishna to be the self of their self, as such. So therefore, in answer to Parashar Maharaj's question, Shukadeva Goswami explains, because they are taking Krishna to be their very selves. They're actually self-centered in this sense. They take Krishna to be their very selves. So therefore, when Krishna expanded as their children, then their children was most dear to them because it was actually Krishna who they take to be their very selves. Or just Jiva is not different from Krishna. So they take it to be their very selves. So everyone is self-centered actually. It's just a matter of what is your conception of self-centeredness. And most of our conception of self-centeredness is related to the body and mind. And very rare is a person who thinks the self to be the soul. That's very rare. And even more rare than that is someone who takes Krishna to be their self. Their very self, the very life of their life. Without pleasing Krishna's desire, I cannot live. That is most rare, hardly to be seen in this world. And it's hardly to be seen in this world also people who take the soul to be the self. And therefore are serious about self-realization on account of that, in a selfish way even. That is very rare to see. What is most commonly seen in the material world is taking the body and mind to be the self. This self-centeredness. And on account of this self-centeredness, one can do horrible activities, most abominable acts. That's what's being mentioned here in the purport. To maintain oneself, one is willing to exploit their own family members. That's mentioned here. And if he is not successful in exploiting them, then he's prepared to give them all types of trouble. That's what it says. He's prepared to give them all types of trouble. So Prabhupada says, without Krishna consciousness, people will deteriorate further and further into a hellish condition, wherein they will perform abominable acts. So then the solution to the problem is to become self-centered with the conception of Krishna as ourself. Of course, that is the process of devotional service. Until then as sadhakas, as practicing devotees, we have to take it for granted that the other forms of self-centeredness is actually operative. And whatever we're doing or thinking is through the lens of that self-centered conception, namely bodily concept of life, gross or subtle bodily concept of life. And as practicing devotees, we already know that that's the reality of the situation. So Krishna has told us to tolerate that and carry on with the process of devotional service. Because Prabhupada says that without Krishna conscious, people will deteriorate further and further. So the whole problem in the material world is everyone is self-centered. They're small circles of love, which really only extends to themselves. It only appears to extend to others, actually. It doesn't even extend to others. That is artificial. And the purport to this section of Bhagavatam is mentioned. Sometimes it's saying that a mother will give up her life also for a child. So certainly her child must be more dear than her own self. She give up her life. That means child is more dear, isn't it? Or the patriot, he will give up his life for his country. You know, long live America or something like that. And he'll give up his life. That means America is more dear than his own self, isn't it? You say yes? It is not. That is the trick of the whole thing. It is not, because, as described there in this section very beautifully, he has a false ego of himself as an American, for example. So when he gives up his life for America, it satisfies that false egoistic concept that I've given up my life, so therefore I'm glorious. Again, another self-centered thing. It looks very commendable and wonderful, but actually it only satisfies his false egoistic idea. So it becomes a self-centered activity, yet again. And same with the mother. The mother is killing because it's my child. So that such a sacrifice satisfies her false egoistic idea of this being my child. So in this way, everyone is operating on the material concept of life. And of course, we may say, well, what is the problem? That is a very nice thing. They have sacrificed their life. It's for a good cause. That's very nice. But the point is, without Krishna consciousness, people will deteriorate further and further. It's only a matter of time before self-centeredness actually degrades to the lowest level. It's just like if you put something on the water that has heavy weight in it, then it's only a matter of time before it sinks to the bottom of the sea. So the self-centered idea based on the conception of the body or mind is like heavy weights. So even though it may take an apparently pristine form in the form of sacrifice for the country and sacrifice for others, it looks very nice, but it's only a matter of time before it degrades to the lowest level on account of it actually being based on the bodily concept. So Prabhupada's point is very simple. Without Krishna consciousness, then simply degradation will ensue further and further. So then the point is that we have to become Krishna conscious by taking shelter of the holy name of Krishna primarily, and the Srimad Bhagavatam. These are Shabda avatars for elevating our consciousness in the Kali Yuga. Shabda avatar means the sound avatar of Krishna. So in this world, 3 sound avatars of Krishna: holy name of Krishna, and Srimad Bhagavatam, and also Gayatri Mantra. So some of you may not have that one yet. But you can at least associate with the Srimad Bhagavatam and the holy name of Krishna. And that way, becoming more and more absorbed in the sound vibration of Krishna as the holy name. And as the conceptions given in the Bhagavatam, then we can gradually move our consciousness upward toward Krishna. Otherwise, if we don't accept Krishna as the self, then it's only a matter of time we degrade. Of course, if we become a little elevated and we accept our soul as our very self, then we might be able to elevate all the way up to the Brahman platform. But because of lacking bhava, achuta bhava varjitam, if you don't have bhava, naishkarmyam apachuta bhava varjitam, Narada Muni said that is not very beautiful. And it's not very beautiful because eventually you fall down from that position also. It is not really permanent. Even if Nashkamya means you are free from all material attachment on account of realization of the soul, that is very rare. And Mahamuni says, but that is also not very good. Nashobhate, that is not beautiful either. That is not very good either. Why? Achuta bhava varjitam, because it's devoid of achuta bhava. There is no achuta bhava. So therefore, you may rise to the Brahman platform, but you must fall again, because there is no achuta bhava. What to speak of in the material concept of life, there's definitely no achuta bhava. There's me bhava. Me bhava, I, me, mine, bhav. Which is another way of saying the asura bhav, the demoniac mentality of self-centeredness. So we have to become Krishna conscious. It's absolutely imperative. We may create a mutual admiration society. I was reading from that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's essay the other day for Thakur Bhaktivinoda's appearance. And he was saying the mutual admiration society of dupes. You know what a dupe is? You should be laughing. A dupe is that's a very rude way of saying stupid. Even the word stupid is rude. A dupe is it's like a slap in the face. Like if you've been duped, Like sometimes Americans, when we go to India, we're duped constantly because we don't speak the language. So we need to go a short distance of 10 minutes and they charge us 500 rupees. And we calculate in terms of American dollars. So we think, oh, okay, not bad, because a cab ride in Chicago, even 10 minutes can cost you quite a bit of money, $5, sometimes $10, even if it's a short while because of traffic or something. So then how much is 500 rupees? And $8? $8 or $9. So then they say 500 rupees. We think, oh, I'm getting a good deal. And then we get to the temple or wherever the location we're going. They said, you've been duped. It only costs 10 rupees. You become completely bewildered. Oh, 10 rupees, I've been duped. So to be duped is not a very good thing. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said we may create a mutual admiration society of dupes in the form of, in other words, we don't want to live in illusion that we're rendering service to one another without having actually transcended our tendency for self-centered action. Means I'm doing this because it pleases me, the self. Whether or not it pleases Krishna is really irrelevant. If it pleases the spiritual master, fantastic. But the real thing is that I am satisfied. That is the upadesha saram, the essence of all instructions. So we should know for certain that without elevating our consciousness, then it is only a matter of time before our, of course, illusion is broken, and we fall to a lower level of existence. Even if we can maintain the externals somehow or other, which is also very difficult, but internally it'll be rough and scruff because we're self-centered actually. Therefore, the whole process of bhakti is meant to strip away that strong tendency for self-centered activity. And therefore, as conditioned souls, we naturally suffer, of course. That's natural, actually. Just as it is just like Arjuna being asked to kill his relatives. It is a great form of suffering because we're not taking Krishna as the self. So we suffer naturally. So that suffering is called tapasya. That suffering has to be endured in order to actually be cleansed of that tendency. Otherwise, it will never go. Then we will be a mutual admiration society of dupes only. We're only duping each other in the form of, pleasing words like Prabhu, let me wash your lotus feet. I was talking to Vamsi Prabhu the other night. You remember Vamsi Prabhu? So we were talking, he was mentioning this thing to me. Yes, he said, Prabhu, from NOI 6, we said we're not supposed to judge the devotees, but we should glorify them. But then oftentimes we were saying, if we glorify neophytes, they become proud. So then should we not glorify them? He was discussing from this angle of vision the other night at 9:30. So we may be able to dupe one another like that, but then that will not bring satisfaction in the heart because finally it's devoid of a Achuta Bhava. So then how long it can maintain? So this Prabhupada is taught. Here, are there any questions, comments, concerns? No? Okay, Richard.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Simple question. In terms of rasa tattva, if we think of Krishna as ourself, where does Radharani fit in that picture?
Krishna is always with his devotees.
Pardon?
Krishna is always with his devotees. So that's a seed thought. You have to work with that.
He's always with his devotees?
Yes. There is no Krishna without Radha or Subal or Mother Jasoda or Ambarish Maharaj or Prahlad Maharaj. Prahlad Maharaj is also, he's devotee of Krishna, actually. Many say he's devotee of Nrsimha, but he's actually a devotee of Lord Govinda. Because if you read this section, it's mentioned in the section where Hiranyakashipu was trying to kill Prahlad. It is mentioned that he was embraced by the arms of Lord Govinda, and therefore his father was not able to kill him. So Krishna is always, wherever his devotees are, Krishna is there. However is Krishna, then his devotees are there. That is the understanding.
I understand that to a certain extent, but we also know simply that there's times of the day where they're not together, for instance. And
They're always together.
What's that?
They're always together.
Even when they're separated, they're always together, is what you're saying?
They're always together. Separation is simply for augmenting the joy of union, but they're actually never really separated because their absorption in Krishna is so intense, and vice versa. So there is really no true separation. That is the glory of rendering service in separation, that there is actually no separation on account of that form of love for Krishna. Just by that form of love, they're actually with Krishna more than when they're with Krishna. That is the explanation. Okay, he wanted to say something first.
Prabhuji, thank you for your class. I need to seek a query, like two-part. First part is, since there is such a deep bodily conception of life, do you think this is, I don't see a reason why people go for impersonalism, for like no form of Krishna. If we ourselves are so deeply rooted with the conception of body, so is this because of this me bhav, this rooted out impersonal form, or I don't see a reason like why there is an existence of impersonalism.
Oh.
Because we ourselves, first-hand experience says, like, there should be.
That there should be what?
A form of Lord.
Well, that's exactly how my bodies argue. Because our experiences are formed, therefore, and the ultimate truth is formless. And that's wonderful, because I don't have to deal with persons anymore, which has been a source of great misery. Isn't it? Therefore, and Prabhupada teaches in 410 Gita, Vidaragabhaya Krodha Mamaya Mama Pashita, that in order to take full shelter of him, we have to overcome attachment, fear, and anger. And the particular fear that is mentioned is the fear of being a person. Because the experience of personhood in the material world is usually very unpalatable, repeatedly. So then they think that happiness lies in being in person or impersonal. And so such an idea comes up. Let me see, if I was not conscious, then I wouldn't suffer, right? So then from this you get Buddhism and impersonalism, which is practically the same philosophy. Buddhism says just become zero. That's fantastic. I'm not conscious of anything. There can be no suffering. And impersonalism says the same thing. Impersonalism says you're just consciousness, but you're not conscious of anything. So that's as good as a rock. If you're not conscious of anything, that is as good as not existing. So it's actually the same philosophy. It's just a little bit trick language is used as such. At least it establishes the Vedas. But the idea is the same, that I'm suffering because I'm conscious of variety, the material variety. Therefore, if I become unconscious of that, and they have no information of the spiritual variety, and even when they hear the idea, they don't like the idea of spiritual variety because they project their experience of material variety onto the spiritual idea and become disgusted with such a concept. So in the ultimate truth, is no variety at all. No name, no form, no qualities, no activities, and most importantly, no interactions. Impersonal existence. Then I'll be completely blissful. Of course, there's some happiness in impersonal existence, undoubtedly. It is not comparable, though, to the experience of relationship with Krishna. But this is where the idea comes up, as far as I've understood.
And you gave an example of a warrior sacrificing his life for the country because of his false ego. We also have references like soldiers sacrificing their life in the different era, like in Mahabharata, many soldiers, they gave up their life.
Yeah, so I'm sure some of them have false egos, and some of them are like Arjuna, doing it for the pleasure of Krishna, or Bhishma, also for the pleasure of Krishna. Many, not just them, exclusively the Pandavas and so on. So in Krishna's Leelas, you have to understand there's a mix of eternally perfect souls, souls who are becoming perfect through sadhana, and souls who are conditioned. They all come together in one area. You might find that to be a little unfair that, well, can I be a conditioned soul that also gets the good fortune of... But unfortunately, no. At least not at the present moment. So there are different types of souls. So when in one area, so some of those souls could have certainly had false ego, and some of them, of course, didn't. Like that.
Asking multiple questions. And now, like, there is a mix of people with Krishna consciousness in the same way, depending on their conditioning. So how one should give up, move forward, a tip, could you like to shed something?
I missed that. How does one move forward?
I mean, we are in a mix of different level of bhakti we encounter, like you shared. Prabhu said, like, if we glorify a non-devotee, he might be puffed up. So I am that devotee, like, a little bit encouragement can go, may backfire for a person like me. Like, if I see, like, if people keep on navigating me, that's the right path for me. So I become very complacent when I see, like, okay, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. This me bhav triggers. So how I can keep on shutting this day-to-day basis?
I don't know. It seems like you gave the answer in your monologue. By being guided, you said something like that. So that seems like the answer. Of course, if we're fortunate enough to have devotees who give us punishment, that is always helpful too. Generally, if you lived in like a gurukul or something, then the spiritual master gives a lot of punishment. I just read one purport where Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur was describing how different persons in different ashrams are liberated. I forget the comparison. All I remember, because it stuck out of my mind, how through this process the brahmachari is liberated from the punishments of the guru. And you could see that was the only thing that stuck for me in the purport. All the other stuff that he was speaking about, I missed out because that point came in my mind prominently, the punishment of the guru. In other words, living in a gurukul was actually, it's austere. It's an austerity to live in a gurukul. It actually meant to be austere. If you go to like our gurukul in Mayapur, which is very wonderful, run by Bhaktivedanta Purna Maharaj, then you see the conditions they live in are actually austere, although aesthetically very beautiful, but it's quite austere. And also living under the guidance of the guru, the constant eye of the guru, that is also very painful for the conditioned soul. Someone's always got their eyes looking and then chastising you regularly or constantly, and various other forms. So that's actually very helpful. That builds character and so on. It helps to give up the idea. We hear oftentimes Prabhupada describes the brahmachari would go out and collect for the spiritual master. And if the spiritual master didn't call him for prasadam, then he fasted for the day. Can you imagine such a standard today? There would be all-out war. They would immediately say, "This is not my guru." What type of nonsense? He forgot to call me for prasadam. But they used to train them up like that on purpose, in order to help them to understand that nothing is theirs. They're not the center of attention, or the center, but rather Krishna is the center, and Guru is the center. They would have to give everything to the Guru. Now, if we don't have that, then the process is there. We're associating with devotees, and this is another way of purification. I like the way that it was expressed by Dinabandhu Prabhu. It's like many rocks with jagged edges smashing against each other. And through that process, they become a little smooth. Because they keep smashing into each other, so they become a little smooth. So in the case of not existing in a Gurukula, like many of us have not grown up in Gurukula, nor are we existing in one now, then by existing with one another, Bhakta Sanivas, Tandera Charana Sevi, Bhakta Sanivas, we should live in the association of devotees. Then what happens is the jagged edges of our anarthas smash against each other. And this process also helps to purify the soul, along with devotees who can help to keep us encouraged to move forward like that. Hare Krishna. Okay, Jitendra, do you want to say something? No, Jitendra Prabhu wants to say something.
I never heard the jagged edges thing, but I did hear the fishbowl. Did you ever hear the fishbowl thing? Where, they used to use that expression, because you have to get along with people because you're in the same bowl and you're always running into one another, so they used to call it the fishbowl effect.
See, the only reason I wouldn't like that example as much is because it won't improve. See, the jagged edges example means by smashing into each other, the edges become smooth. So that's a nice, but the fishbowl means we might have to continue to exist like this unhappily, unhappily forever after.
Well, you kind of avoid, the fishes are avoiding.
That's impossible. It's a fishbowl. Eventually we have to contact one another. So I would be less inclined to use that particular analogy, because it will give the idea of the conditioned soul that there's no hope whatsoever of improvement. We will forever have to remain unhappy. So I'm partially reluctant to use that one.
And then I was thinking about Bhakta Luke and Manshu and their computers, and I was thinking, well, because I always used to think in my mind the three most important thing are your bead bag, your keys, and your wallet. But their computers, they got all this information on it, so, it seems like it's quite painful. Because, a lot of that's, most of it's all probably Krishna's, knowledge, so they can do their service. So maybe you could express yourself, because I really, I feel empathetic for you, because I know what you're going through, but here you are in class and you're kind of cool, calm, and collected. Can you say something about that? Well, it's an individual experience.
Hare Krishna. I had a question, if that's all right. Thank you, Gopal. That's very thoughtful. You're mentioning selfishness. I'm
not mentioning. Shukadeva Goswami mentioned.
Yes, bro. The discussion was on selfishness, and I was hoping you could help me understand how what we hear about this phrase, charity begins at home. Because one kind of solution when a person hears, oh, I'm too selfish, I'm too selfish.
That I already explained in the class. The verse talked about self-centeredness. Swa atma eva vallabha. So it is swa atma, one's own self, that is vallabha, that is most dear. So then Shukadeva Goswami goes on to describe, when one accepts the atma to be the body or the mind, then the dearness of other things is due to its relationship with the body. And therefore, as in the purport we were hearing about, I'm prepared to sacrifice those other things that are only dear because of its relationship to the body, for the body. So I'm willing to give up wife, children, even wealth and so on if my own body comes into trouble. And of course, in the very rare cases where someone wants to sacrifice for another, it's to satisfy the false egoistic idea of self. That's what was described. For those who take the Atma to be their souls, then they're swavimukti kama. They're very desirous about their own liberation and liberation from material existence. That becomes their concern. They're not antagonistic towards society, but they're not pararthanishta. They're not fixed on the welfare of others because they're fixing their own liberation. And that is certainly glorious to some degree, and also very rarely to be seen, especially in the age of Kali. But then the final concept of the self is Krishna, sukshmana apyaham jiva. And therefore I already described the residents of Vrindavan. Sometimes their devotion is called a Sayuja Mukti by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, because their desires are so much one with Krishna. So he describes it like that, Sayuja Mukti. In that sense, then whatever is pleasing to Krishna, myself, they take Krishna to be their self. So then that already described. We hear that your statement is that charity begins at home. So what does it mean? It means to realize Krishna as the self of the self by becoming Krishna conscious through the process of bhaktya sanjataya bhaktya, by bhakti that is gained from bhakti, or that means by prema that is gained from sadhana. Bhaktya sanjataya bhaktya. Like that. That is, so the process of accepting this devotional service is a process of charity to one's own self as such.
So if someone were to say, well, that seems like you're neglecting all these other living entities to whom you may have various responsibilities or duties.
No, that's because they don't understand who Krishna is. So just like a child may not understand that giving water to the root is actually beneficial for the entire tree. So he criticizes the mother, why are you not giving to so many leaves you've neglected? You're only giving to the root. So that is due to his poor fund of knowledge. But, and it is a fact that devotees who are really devotees and fixing Krishna's pleasure, then it is a natural expression of their devotion to extend to other entities for the pleasure of Krishna. I already mentioned that Prabhupada describes this, that the devotees preaching to the living entity is not because of the plight of the living entity as much as it is the pleasure of Krishna. Because the plight of the conditioned soul, in one sense, is all illusory, because he's absorbed in a false identification. It's just like someone is watching television and identifying with the sports person they're watching. I've given this example. And they're suffering like anything. It has nothing to do with them. So it's all illusion, actually. So also the plight of the conditioned soul in the material world is akin to that. Therefore, Krishna says, don't lament for the living or the dying. So they don't do that. But they do lament, as Prahlad Maharaj expresses, Shocheta tovi mukacheta sa indriyartha maya sukhaya bharamudara tovi muna. They do lament the ignorance of the living entity. And therefore they want to extend to the living entity, transcendental knowledge about Krishna to bring them out of their ignorance. But the plight of the conditioned soul is therefore, because it's ultimately illusory, is not as important as the pleasure of Krishna. And so why do the devotees preach and go out to preach Krishna consciousness? Because it brings pleasure to Krishna. Their idea is that we're bringing more people, or more living entities, I should say rather, to expand the ocean of Krishna's joy. Now we may say, okay, how the living entity is so minute, how can he expand the ocean of Krishna's joy? But I like the way Andhra Prabhu put it in a very visual way. He said it's just like sprinkles on a cake. I like that imagery because it makes sense to me. It's just like a sprinkle on a cake is actually insignificant, and the cake is not necessarily in need of sprinkles. But when you put sprinkles on the cake, it makes the cake seem all the more attractive. And how do you say it? It whets the appetite to enjoy the cake. Or similarly, another example is given. It's just like when you see a great big fire, then you see the little flames around the fire. then it makes the fire all the more captivating. When you see just like a flame burning, it's a fire, but when you see the little fire sparks, I don't know if you've ever been camping before, and then you have these huge bonfires, and then the sparks are dancing around the fire, and it makes the fire all the more captivating. So similarly, to invite the jivas to establish their relationship with Krishna, it expands the ocean of joy for Krishna. And this is the main motivating factor for preaching. If it's simply the plight of the jivas, then one may preach sometimes and may sometimes not preach. On account of the plight of the jivas actually being rather insignificant, at least to my own situation right now. But if I was really fixed on the pleasure of Krishna, then as a natural expression of that love for Krishna, this becomes a natural feature of their devotion. At least in terms of their lifestyle, it may not be seen that they always go out and preach per se, but in terms of their lifestyle, they set up a very nice example for living entities to become inspired by. But oftentimes it is also seen that they will extend also as a natural expression of joy. So someone may criticize us that, your statement, that, oh, you're getting absorbed in bhakti, and what are you doing for living entities? Actually, I'm doing a lot by developing Krishna conscious. Because I had to really, first of all, become Krishna conscious to express real compassion to anyone. Otherwise, the so-called compassion of these do-gooders, welfare workers and so on, is a very temporary affair. They go, for example, maybe they go and feed people and so on. It's very commendable. But there's very few of those persons who are doing that throughout their life. It's like a 1 or 2 time program, and the rest of the time they're engaged in American lifestyle, which is a source of misery for all these living entities they just went to go and help. So it's contradictory existence on a lack of not having Krishna consciousness. They don't see the connection. So therefore, our point is, first you have to really become Krishna conscious to do, just like by being a vegetarian, for example. That is not Krishna conscious per se. A Krishna conscious person is naturally vegetarian, non-violent, and so on. So Prabhupada will explain, you don't have to teach a devotee to be vegetarian, to be non-violent. It's a natural expression of his consciousness. So therefore, it seems to me more reasonable a proposition to encourage everyone to become Krishna conscious. And that way, a lot of problems will immediately get solved. But now, on a lack of our Krishna consciousness, we're creating so many problems, and then we're trying to correct them. Dukoshadam tadapi dukkam ata dhyaham. Prahlad Maharaj says the remedy for the so-called problem is more problematic than the original problem. And for what reason? Atat dhyaham, because they're still swallowed by the Bali concept. They haven't actually removed the disease. So it seems to me that our proposition that becoming fully Krishna conscious through sadhana bhakti, which also has forms of expression of compassion, even in the stage of practice, we distribute prasadam, we go out and do Harinam Sankirtan, we're holding college programs, kids are coming, people are coming, they're getting, so that we're doing something for the society as far as the conventional understanding of welfare work is concerned. Then I think devotees do a lot more. How many people we know feeding 200 people every week? Of course, a lot, well, our temple feeds a lot more because throughout the day, living entities who aren't even Krishna conscious are coming and eating regularly. And that's due to the mercy of Kishore Kishori. They restricted some of their mercy because when I first moved in, people used to come for lunchtime here every day when I first moved in, about 75 people a day used to come for lunch. None of them were devotees either. They used to come and Vishwakarma would cook for all those people. Can you imagine? When Sir came, he put a stop to that. Of course. Some people weren't happy about that. But anyway, so the point is that as devotees, we are, in the conventional understanding of welfare, we're doing a lot for the people, in fact. At the same time, we're giving focus to becoming Krishna conscious, which is the real solution.
Let's go follow.
Okay.
So what would prevent one then, without understanding, from just thinking, oh, then let me just chant Hare Krishna?
Well, some devotees do that.
Uh-huh.
Some devotees do that. They do simply just chant Hare Krishna. That is not exactly bona fide. Srila Prabhupada criticized imitation, not following the footsteps. Imitation means to try to apply something without the substance. That is called imitation. So imitation is never encouraged because you only degrade yourself by imitation. So in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's preaching, he seemed to criticize very heavily, not that he seemed to, he actually criticized very heavily things that were actually imitation. But that doesn't mean that the genuine thing was shunned. And if you see some of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's teachings, Upadeshavali and so on, they weren't shunned at all. But I think Sridhar Maharaj is the godbrother Srila Prabhupada. He said Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, 99% of his preaching was what wasn't rasa, because we're all bewildered. So many anarthas. Actually, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta has taught in his Prakrita Rasa Shatadushini that as long as one is still swallowed up by anarthas, he is not qualified to hear about rasa tattva. But unfortunately, on account of anarthas, one does not acknowledge the deep conditioning that they're actually undergoing. As a result, they inquire about such things from false gurus who teach them such things prematurely. And that way they make a whole joke of the whole process, and then no one wants to take their Krishna consciousness. That was when Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur appeared to try to reestablish the pristine nature of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Because conditioned souls who weren't sufficiently honest to acknowledge their anarthas made a joke of the whole process. So it's natural that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta would heavily criticize such imitation. But that doesn't mean the real thing is shunned. So there are some devotees who are actually situated on that platform, some do just chant. That is not to be, of course they don't just chant, they still do sadhu sangha and other things. Even nirjan bhajan, generally, first of all, generally practiced by renunciates. You don't see so much mention of this in Gaur Lila, because you hear a lot about Lord Chaitanya's householder followers. Only in Puri do you hear more about this just like complete absorption in the moods of Radha, but you don't hear that so much before that, before his staying in Puri. I forgot the flow of thought I was making there. Yeah, they live in a society of devotees. So they come together, they do sadhu sangha, they sing the bhajans together. If you read Jaiva Dharma, it's described in that way. They're all Bhajanandis, but they were preaching all the time. People were coming to their cottage groves, they would preach to them, they would get absorbed in kirtan and very sweet loving exchanges. When you read Jaiva Dharma, you feel very sad that I can't have an exchange like this with any Vaishnava, you know? So they had very sweet relationships with devotees. They did kirtan together, they preached, but then they were mostly absorbed in chanting. They would spend, in Jaiva Dharma, everyone's chanting at least 200,000 names a day, and they have the lifestyle for that, and it's not imitation, that's the main point. In Kali Yuga, you see mostly imitation, unfortunately. So it becomes a very sad affair.
We hear also that there will be this, upsurge of Krishna consciousness worldwide, which will reduce the effects of Kali Yuga, like this golden age of Lord Chaitanya. So,
yeah, I don't know so much about that. I haven't looked into that. I feel this is the golden age. It's already begun. I mean, I don't know. I haven't looked into the details. I have saw some things mentioned about this by Gaura Govinda Swami and a few other contemporary Vaishnavas of Srila Prabhupada. But I'm not so clear on that particular subject matter. So I'm not speaking. But Lord Chaitanya is here. Actually, Lord Chaitanya only appears in the first part of Kali Yuga. Every yuga has 12 divisions to it. And the first division is called, I think, the Pratama division. So Lord Chaitanya made his appearance in that first division of the Kali Yuga. This is described in the Adi Lila 3rd chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita. And so for that reason, we're getting opportunity in this first part of the Kali Yuga to associate with Lord Chaitanya's movement and hear about all these things which we ordinarily wouldn't know about even in the Satya Yuga. So for me, that seems like a golden period to me, to take advantage of the golden avatar's mercy to the people of this first part of the Kali Yuga. And how long that will last, Prabhupada has extended it up to 10,000 years. And, we'll see. I'm not personally so concerned about that because I got to get out within that period. and then maybe if I make it back to Godhead, and if Krishna so desires, I can descend again as a Nitya Mukta avatar and help everyone else out who didn't make it during that golden period where they got the chance for Lord Chaitanya's mercy. So I kind of tend to be more concerned about that element. Because their ideas about this is, they're variegated, so it's hard to, one gets confused. I got confused when I looked at it some years ago. I don't know if it's on. I don't know if it's on.
Thank you. You know, would it be possible to recreate such a society, a sangha of devotees, as you were describing?
Yeah, that's what the Krishna consciousness movement is all about. Creating such Prabhupada, this movement has been created to give people the opportunity to associate with devotees and hear about Krishna. So that's exactly what the society is. Now, of course, it doesn't look exactly like Jaiva Dharma situation. And that's because there are no Bower Groves anymore. There are no Bower Groves and very pristine. These things are being destroyed on account of the demoniac influence of the leadership today. So the form may change. And therefore, we often hear that substance is more important than form. Of course, form is not unimportant. We only give more emphasis to substance over form when the form tends to be divergent from the substance. And therefore, we say substance is superior to form. Otherwise, form is also important. We want to see Krishna's form and so on, because his form and the substance of Krishna are non-different. There's no within and without with Krishna. So the form of things, of course, in Kali Yuga are changing rapidly. You know, where are the forests for the yogis to go and meditate?
This chapter 16, 17, first canto, and many purports Prabhupada is emphasizing this point of cow protection and Brahminical culture, and then just by favoring these two elements of human society, automatically Krishna will grace any society who manages to do these two things. Automatically he will bless them because he will be so pleased.
Fantastic.
So
I guess we got to find the Brahmanas first.
Bowers maybe could reappear, the groves, if we...
That would be absolutely fantastic. I'm slightly doubtful. Like, although we hear oftentimes in our movement that Prabhupada left 50% of his mission unfulfilled in the form of reestablishing Varnashram Dharma. To be real with you, of course I don't think we're going to see it in our lifetime, of course. And whether or not it will actually be able to take place in its sterling form, as in during Vedic times, I'm highly doubtful, because you need proper leadership, Kshatriyas, to enforce. First of all, you need Brahmanas. That's the basis of any Varnashram culture. So that's hard enough to find. And then if you happen to even get Brahmanas, then you need Kshatriyas to enforce their line of thought for the benefit of the people at large. And that's going to be very difficult, because I don't think these demoniac leaders are going to just offer it to, okay, Krishna consciousness movement, you take over the leadership and lead the world. At least I'm highly doubtful that's going to happen. And anyway, in any case, you need, first of all, Brahminical culture. And if you haven't noticed, in the age of Kali, the mode of ignorance is very strong and prevalent. So then Prabhupada's, before that 50% of his mission that was unfulfilled, there was the other 50% that was established by Prabhupada, namely, spreading the holy name of Krishna, giving people opportunity to chant and purify their existence so that they would develop Brahminical qualities, by which you can have a Brahminical culture to begin with, and then thus a Varnashram culture, cow protection, and so on. So our movement is, of course, that only. It is not that the 50% that is left undone, we got to do that, and not maintain the 50% that was done by Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada already covered that part, and therefore let me do this part. You're supposed to still maintain that. Prabhupada said, if you can't do anything else, then just maintain. And that's hard enough, because maintenance is so hard that Lord Vishnu has to take control of that mode of nature. No one else can do it, because it's so challenging to maintain anything, all the more so in the age of Kali. So our process is still that process of chanting the holy name, spreading the holy name of Krishna, giving people a chance to chant, and creating a society by which they could participate in that. Now, like I said, the form of it is, of course, quite different than what you're going to get in the Jaiva Dharma. And therefore, people who are not understanding substance and tending to give the external things the upper hand, they may not always appreciate the mercy of the acharyas in the various forms in which they present their movements. Oftentimes, institutions are criticized because they got their problems naturally. Well, what about the glory of spreading Krishna consciousness and at least giving everyone the opportunity, at least a vast majority of living entities the opportunity to connect with Krishna, at least begin their spiritual life in some form. And that's what this movement has provided. Now, there are different levels of devotees within the movement, and we tend to like to focus on that sometimes, and therefore criticism comes up of Vaishnavas and all these things. That is not very good. We should rather take the essence of the thing, and the essence is that by Prabhupada's mercy, the whole world is actually getting an opportunity to know about Krishna. And Prabhupada and the Gaudiya Vaishnavas at large, the Chaitanya tree is spreading. All sorts of Vaishnavas, Gaudiya Vaishnavas, that is. They're giving opportunity. So we should take that essence, even though the forms are going to look vastly different. In the future, I expect it's going to look even more different. Because you got to deal with a lot newer things that maybe weren't there in the other ages. You're dealing with a lot of like race things, gender things, sex things, all sorts of things. And the devotees are going to have to be really clever how to give Krishna consciousness to the changing face of the modes of nature. So I suspect the forms are going to look quite, like sometimes I imagine myself taking birth in the Kali Yuga, of course, unfortunately, taking birth sometime like 200 years from now in the future. And what would ISKCON look like then? What would Krishna consciousness? And I suspect it would look a lot different on account of the necessity of broad-minded Vaishnavas figuring out ways to inculcate Krishna consciousness to the ever-changing face of the modes of nature for the benefit of the conditioned souls who are absorbed in those modes. So our society is certainly that, although we do get a lot of criticism, especially from Vaishnavas outside of ISKCON, you know, sometimes for good reasons, but mostly I feel it's like nitpicking because of for missing the essence of what Srila Prabhupada has tried to do for the pleasure of his guru and for the pleasure of Gora. He is certainly a very dear associate of Lord Chaitanya, so if we stay in this movement and try to assist that very dear associate of Lord Chaitanya, then we are certain to get Lord Chaitanya's mercy also. And then if you get Lord Chaitanya's mercy, then you can get the mercy of Radha and Krishna. Otherwise, no mercy. Krishna is not so easy to satisfy. He only hears the prayers of those who are fully surrendered. So therefore, we chant in front of Gaura Nitai's altar when we do kirtan. There's a reason for that. You notice we don't stand here and do the kirtan. We stand over to the side. Some of us stand a little bit more over to the side. Because Lord Krishna only hears those of you fully surrendered. Unfortunately, I'm lacking in Sharanagati, so my prayers aren't going to be heard by Krishna. But Lord Chaitanya is that very same Krishna. And he hears the prayers of all the crying souls. Like Narottam Das prays in that song we were singing, Gauranga Karuna Karo. He said, Lord Chaitanya, if you do not give your mercy to me, seeing how fallen I am, then why are you called as Patita Pavana? I always like that verse. I really like that song just because of that stanza. I was like, that's an awesome stanza. Yeah, seeing how fallen I am. You see only. It is not only you see, everyone is seeing. So you especially see more than anyone else. And therefore, you must give your mercy to me. Otherwise, why are you called as Patita Pavana? I feel like he's like almost chastising Lord Chaitanya. Which makes that song very sweet. Sweet spirit is there. So we chant in front of Gaura Nitai's altar, seek their mercy. And there's some hope at least for us. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Small question, which I don't know.